Greetings YouTube, Richard Lewis here, another video, and something a bit different to the sort of usual video I put out. Now, it was a good few weeks ago now, I recorded a video that was about the Twilight Zone, the TV series. One of the things that's really influenced me, influenced my writing, influenced the way I think about stuff. It was not just about the TV series, obviously it was about the sort of writing of Rod Serling, the adaptation of the work of Richard Matheson, all these great people. And anyway, after I put that video out there, which I didn't monetize because, it was like just a fucking headache with the clips and everything else, it didn't do brilliant, but it got a few thousand hits, and I was inundated. Actually, I got loads of messages like from people on Twitter and through YouTube, and people messaging me saying, I never watched the Twilight Zone before, and this is fucking great. Like, thanks a lot for recommending it. And that's like a good feeling. You're like, yeah, something that maybe people might not have heard about, or there's a generational gap between people being able to appreciate or have access to. We've bridged that by talking about it. So I was really happy and, again, glad to sort of generate that discussion. But I thought, you know what? There's loads of stuff that fits into a similar mold, stuff that influenced me growing up. I was really into all the sort of stuff that went on to become cult horror. In fact, when I was doing my degree, that was my sort of major area in my media modules. I focused on everything to do with the history of horror films. Reason for that being that I think there's no sort of better barometer of what a culture's all about than actually looking at the sort of horror cinema they put out there. It taps into the fears, and I think you can sort of judge a society where it is based on what it's afraid of, if you know what I mean. It gives a really honest appraisal of what a society is all about, like what the summit of its achievements are and everything else. So that's always been my main area of focus, and I loved, for example, all the stuff I did about the 1920s. Like, one of my all-time heroes, like Bela Lugosi, fucking legend. I did at university, did a project and a presentation on him. We had to pick a film icon, and everyone else was like fucking Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, like all this bullshit. I was like, Bela Lugosi, man, we're gonna do him. Then obviously the 50s era, B movies and sci-fi. Love all of that stuff. Going right the way through, I did a major project on sort of Hammer Horror and Amicus films, how they reflected political and ideological changes in the UK in particular with Hammer Horror. So it's been a constant in my life. Now, that started at a real early age because we used to have the local video store just round the corner from where my gran used to live. And it was real, sort of shady little corner store. You went in there and there was these big lurid posters for all the video nasties, like Driller Killer and all of this shit. Just posters up there. Now, the good thing about going around to my gran's was she didn't give a flying fuck about what I watched. Like, 18, that didn't mean anything to her. She was just like, we let him watch what he wants, right? So I knew if I wanted to sort of gorge on something a bit adult, a bit visceral, and you're talking about, this is like between 10 and 11 years old, we would go to the store together, and she would get the films out. I'd pick them, and she'd get the films out. And there'd be occasions. I'm not saying I got to see Driller Killer when I was 10, but I did get to see stuff that her brain didn't. I mean, fuck it, they lived through the Blitz. They know what horror is, right? Like, it ain't this film. So I used to get all that shit when I was younger. And then obviously, once the hook was deep with sort of horror movies, I started really collecting and watching them as I got older and older and older. So it's been a constant in my life, and what I wanted to do was just do like a series of videos, just sort of picking up on some of the cult classics, stuff that influenced me, that I think maybe some of you guys might have missed because they're not really lauded. So you're not going to hear about anything that's like super high profile horror movies. This is like just little sort of curios. Now I'm going to start with just a few from sort of the 80s that really stood out to me. So today's video is about a film called Society, which was released in 1989. The reason I'm starting with this one is that it's just been re-released on Blu-ray. I think it's had a remastering, and it's one of those films where from a tonal viewpoint, it's all over the place. I mean, seriously. So to give you an appraisal of the plot Bill Whitney is the main character's guy. It's like one letter away from Bill Whitey. He lives in fucking Beverly Hills, California, in a mansion. He's a rich kid. He's got everything going for him. He's a jock, but because he's so popular, you know, maybe he can get on the debate team, and he's got cheerleaders as his girlfriend, and he's going to become class president, and everything's going really well for him. But as you'll see from this intro sequence I'm going to splice in, probably is about here, he's convinced that his life, not all that he sees, there's something beneath the surface that he can't quite make out, something unpalatable, something that's given him this sort of sense of dread, this fear, this just unhealthy fixation.
Bill?
It's like a nightmare.
Last night?
My life.
Are you scared?
I get scared.
Of what?
My parents, my sister, you.
Why?
I feel like something's gonna happen. And if I scratch the surface, there'll be something terrible underneath.
It is perfectly normal to experience a certain irrational fear at your age. But it's no more than a stage. And it will pass, I assure you.
So, he's seeing a therapist, that's there, and he's constantly talking to this therapist about how he thinks there's something going on with his family, how he just can't connect, how they feel almost alien and perverted and weird. And this film is kind of a film of two halves. Like, the first half, it almost plays out like a teen comedy. Like, you'll be amazed at where it goes by the end, which I cannot spoil for you. I can't even talk about the end, because the end is the sucker punch to the whole fucking movie. But, first of all, this is just a beautiful sort of critique of what was happening at the end of sort of, you know, the Reagan era, 80s America, the wealthy, the upper classes. It was this idea that even with all of the status and the cultural signifiers of wealth, all of the things that were being associated throughout the 80s as complete fulfillment, all those people on Wall Street, you know, with their cocaine parties, this is where you got to. This was the big show. Beverly Hills, mansions, and yet even somebody that's put in as a, you know, white Anglo-Saxon male protagonist, the classic WASP, we can identify with that sort of sense of unfulfillment. So even though they're perhaps living in a life that we can't identify, that we can only dream and aspire of, it kind of shows that old adage, you know, money can't buy you happiness. There's always like this sort of existential crisis at the core of whatever we achieve. And that's what this film kind of is leading up to. It's leading up to about. But equally as well, his dread, his angst about his position is predicated on the fact that he doesn't feel connected to his family, that he feels that they are alien to him. And there's these scenes that just slowly slip in where you can see that something is very wrong. And again, I think this is an interesting thing, because what it does is, even though he is this rich and wealthy protagonist, somebody that we should basically hate because he's all the things we aren't, he looks at the people around him with complete disdain, disgust, distrust. He doesn't feel like he belongs where he is. And I said, there's some great little scenes that sort of start slowly introducing, like that earlier scene with the worms in the apple, that maybe something is very, very wrong.
Listen, Jenny, I'm just gonna... Jenny, look, I'm sorry, really. I just came in here to get this.
Get out of here!
Now, just before we come back to all of that stuff, one of the great things about this is that it goes into this incredible special effects denouement. You know, it really is. Again, I can't ruin it, because if you give away the ending of society, it fucks it all. You've really got to not see it coming. But the special effects in this film are brilliant. You know, this is all pre-CGI. That's the thing I prefer. Like back when it was all prosthetics, you had to do it all yourself. And they used a special effects guy called Screaming Mad George. Now, you should Google him. He's basically the Japanese equivalent of like a Tom Savini or someone like that. Now, he was involved in loads of movies, and in fact actually didn't get credited on a lot of them. Or if he did, it was real low down. He never sort of gets the plaudits. But films that I know he was involved in, there was obviously Big Trouble in Little China. He was involved in Predator. He did some of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And then, I don't know what he was doing sort of later on. I don't know what happened. I think he worked on some of the Reanimator sequels. But basically, this is like a legend. I don't know what he's up to now. But seriously, like, just an industry legend. And some of the things he was doing when he came over to the United States were just unreal. Like, anyone that talks about the making of the movies when Screaming Mad George was there, it was just like, they'd be like, oh, what we want to do is we want to do this. And he'd go, tell you what, why don't we do that but also do this? And he would just take it to this new level. And in society, this sort of element of body horror is introduced. And it can't work unless it has this, again, this right balance. It's got to be absurd, but it's also got to be really unsettling. And just the use of prosthetics and the way that they're done, again, it's perfect. It's absolutely spot on. Now, all you really need to know about how good a movie this is and whether it's going to go over with you is the magazine Variety absolutely panned it. I'll read you this very brief review. It's almost like the Spinal Tap review of Shit Sandwich. It's pretty short. So Variety magazine said in '88, December 31st, '88, society is an extremely pretentious, obnoxious horror film that unsuccessfully attempts to introduce kinky sexual elements into extravagant makeup effects. Teen Billy Warlock is thought to be paranoid by everyone, including his shrink, when he starts suspecting not only that he must have been adopted, but also that his parents are having incestuous orgies. Anyway, I won't read that paragraph because it gives a bit away. And then it's a sickening climax, notable for its poor continuity. in which makeup expert Screaming Mad George indulges in what's credited as surrealistic makeup effects. The sole bright spot in this film is a very sexy turn by former Playboy magazine model Devon DeVasquez. Now, let me just say, okay, that is all you need to know about the film. That Variety hated it is fucking brilliant, because they're the same pretentious assholes that this, you know, the whole Hollywood Beverly Hills clique, that this film's really saying these people aren't like us, they're fucking aliens. So the fact that they hated it, that is like a 2 fucking thumbs up for me. So anyway, back to the plot, back to the movie. So as our main protagonist Bill starts realizing that things are very wrong, it really does start coming to a head, and this is where the sort of second half kicks in. And the second half is, again, really unsettling, because it starts becoming apparent that what starts out as a psychological horror, you think, is he losing his mind? Is he losing his marbles? Nothing's quite as it seems. Maybe it's going to go down that road. It becomes apparent that he is in the midst of some big, awful, really unsettling conspiracy. And what it starts getting into is the idea that the wealthy people in this society are actually ingesting the poor, that they are indeed alien, and they are feasting, if you like, on people who aren't the same as them, that aren't in their clique. And they have a very different morality to humans, and indeed they're completely amoral in almost every way possible. And again, there's a few little hints throughout the movie that there is this real sort of sexual ambiguity, amoral approach to everything when it comes to pleasure, that the ends always justifies the means.
How do you like your tea? Cream? Sugar? Or do you want me to pee in it?
You're a class act, Clarissa.
Yeah, right there, Dad. That's good.
What's this?
Oh, God, Bill.
Is that thing what I think it is?
That's a really disgusting thing to bring into Mom and Dad's bedroom.
I don't know what's going on here, but I don't appreciate it.
Calm down, Bill.
Some of us have to get to school on time.
You know, you look really nice in a tie.
Now, that is all well and good, but actually, again, what's super important about this as a film, as a horror film, is what it's really saying about class and the class divide. Now, it's kind of, it invokes Swift a little bit, Jonathan Swift, and his modest proposal. When he talked about that, he considered it a reasonable response to any starvation, that the wealthier people, the landlords, they would be allowed to eat the children of the poor. Now, of course, what Swift was saying was a satire. It was satirical. It was basically saying that the rich have been eating the poor anyway, so what? Fuck it, why not give them our kids? What else can we do to help out our overlords? And of course, it was a satire that actually went over a lot of people's heads, and people were horrified when it first came out. Now it's held up as one of the great satirical writings of all time. So it invokes a little bit of that idea, but again, this comes at a time when, again, under Reaganomics, it was really clear, actually, that there was this increasing divide between the supremely wealthy, the aspirational wealthy, and the poor, and people were pushing back against it. There was a lot of pushback against some of the things that were being reported, in the news, some of the excesses, some of the decadence, and this is almost like a sort of cinematic representation of that. This is almost like a call to arms, to be distrustful of the wealthy, to say that the wealthy aren't like us, that they are something alien and abhorrent, and that all of their morality stems from a fundamental inhumanity. So this is actually quite a subversive piece of cinema when it's broken down into its bare elements and what it's trying to say. Yet it plays out like a dark comedy. Now, because this film was kind of the antithesis to a lot of what was coming out of Hollywood at the time, which was all these, gung-ho action movies that we associate with the Reagan years, family films, just real, escapism, popcorn films, right? That was what the 80s was known for. It's no surprise that this film itself actually panned in America. In fact, didn't even get released until like 92, whereas it was released in the 80s in Europe and actually did very well indeed. And I think that ties in with the European sensibilities, that we were more open to the idea of capitalism being a negative force, whereas, of course, in America, this was considered, you can't say that. That's capitalism. We love capitalism. And this is the Reagan era. It's working for everybody right now. In Europe, we were still very savvy as to the sort of negative side of capitalism. Of course, in the UK throughout the 80s and a lot of Europe as well, there were huge upheavals going on that were relating to class warfare. We had Thatcher over in Britain, we had the miners' strikes, we had everything. We had this sort of pushback against the ruling classes, the conservative parties, and that's what was going on. So maybe it sort of subconsciously struck a chord with me at the time, but certainly it's no surprise that it did better in Europe than it did in America. Now, if it's not enough that the film itself is sort of pushing back against 80s consumerist culture and capitalist ideology, it also embodies the philosophy of Baudrillard and the simulacra, which is quite a lofty concept to work into a horror movie. Putting it simply, it's that reality isn't all that it seems, that we take on board affectations of status and culture, but it is all artificial. And indeed, that is the realization that Billy, the protagonist, is coming to throughout the movie. He realizes that the reality that he's living in is just an artificial facade. And he's going to have to choose whether he wants to conform and fit in with that artificial facade, that non-reality. And all it actually takes for him to do that is the sacrifice of himself, that this malevolent force that he's slowly realizing as he scratches away at the surface of reality. They're welcoming of him. They don't want to necessarily create conflict. It's very easy to be absorbed and become part of that collective. On the other hand, he can keep fighting and pushing against them and exist in sort of a non-reality state where everyone assumes that he is insane. He becomes some sort of outlier to the society. And nothing can be taken for granted. So it's a fundamental choice. And again, that itself, the Baudrillard's sort of ideas there, that itself is almost like kind of an existential thing that we all have to go through. We hit points in our lives where we have to compromise our personalities, that we have to conform, we have to fit in, we have to sell out and belong, or for a select few, for minority, you have to choose not to do that, and life becomes very difficult, very unpleasant. So it strikes that inner chord, and it's quite a profound message ultimately for what is delivered in this sort of horror comedy. Now, I did say I can't talk about the end. I've already given away too much really to enjoy the film in the same way that you would if you'd come to it as a newcomer in the 80s. But obviously with the internet and Google, you probably would have found out the basics anyway. But I urge you now, if you're watching this video and think, look, I'm gonna watch this film, don't read up on the ending. Just go into it fresh, because the last 15 minutes are crazy. They are insane, they are disgusting, and they are so over the top that that's where the film really comes together, and you realise you've watched something very special. Not just because it's cheap, not just because it's got shock value, but ultimately because what it's saying, it's almost like you cannot have the profound without sort of mirroring it against the absurd. And the way the film descends into this nightmarish, truly repulsive conclusion, it really ties the whole themes of the movie together. Everything becomes very apparent. And for me, in horror, there are very few films, especially in the 80s, think about it, a time when ultimately the 80s movie is sort of dealing with the sort of revamping of slasher movies, the idea of the invader from outside, the nightmarish forces, the supernatural. There was a lot of that going on in the 80s. This is actually the enemy within, which is quite a rare concept in the 80s. You don't get a lot of that. That's more of a trope of 1950s horror where people were terrified by the spectre of communism. By this point, capitalism's prevailed, dominant Western ideologies prevailed. The enemy within has been defeated because look at all our decadence, look at all our wealth. Our way of life was right. We know it all along. And of course, you do get the odd sort of offshoot from like Cold War stuff, but nothing like the height of the 50s paranoia. So the enemy within, not really a big theme in 80s horror. That sort of starts coming back post-terrorism, if you notice the trends within recent horror films. So this is a scathing attack on the nouveau riche. The wealthy in America that aren't old money, the people that have managed to make their fortune almost certainly at the expense of other people. So this is just a wonderful summation of everything that was wrong with the 80s, everything that was wrong with America in the 80s, and it's delivered in a really funny, really disgusting way. So please, 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 hunt it down. Like I say, it's just been out, it's remastered, you can get it. I'm sure you'll be able to watch it online as well, but you should really buy this movie, directed by Brian Yuzna of Reanimator fame, I believe. So yeah, absolutely check it out. Thanks for watching the vid.